Blue Mind is a platform to raise consciousness and to elevate your performance and develop your physical and emotional health. We interview experts in mind and body, writers, sports people, entrepreneurs, and those with an inspiring story to tell to help us all raise our performance to the next level. So welcome to Blue Mind.
Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Blue Mind podcast, Blue Mind show. I think we're up to 65 subscribers now, so love the fact that we're continuously growing, and really appreciate the messages that you send, the feedback. It certainly helps. It's always good to gain insight from yourselves. Today we've got Ed as always, and we also have a clinical psychologist that specialises in burnout, which is definitely a hot topic at the moment. I've had a few people that I've spoken to this week that are struggling with this very, very specific topic. So Dr. Matt Slavin, absolutely delighted to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hello, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me on. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I feel like it's important to talk about how we first came to hear about Matt and his work. So there is a beautiful venue near where we live, which is an outdoor obstacle course for adults. And Matt recently launched an event there for men. And it was through our mutual contact. They said, hey, you must speak to this guy. It's definitely worth networking with, engaging with, potentially collaborating with. So here we are. It feels like we have a similar beliefs, similar values, similar vision to share, be vulnerable, and help men where possible. And let's get into the conversation. So Matt, what is a clinical psychologist that specialises in burnout?
A great question. Okay, so there's so many different titles knocking around in the helping world, in the therapy world. So clinical psychologist, right? So it's good to know that anyone can call themselves a psychologist. So it's not regulated, it's not protected. So tomorrow, if you really wanted to call yourself a psychologist with some good branding, you can go and do that.
All right, I'm definitely doing it, by the way. I'm just making
cautionary tale, you know. But to be a clinical psychologist is it's a protected title across the world, and definitely in the UK. So what it means is I help people with their mental health. That's my training, and help them understand how their brain works and how to be their very best. And also I deal with people at their worst times in life as well. So it's a very specialist training to be a clinical psychologist. So to be a doctoral level qualification, and I'm registered and regulated by the Healthcare Professions Council, which means at any point, if I'm not doing good work, I'll be struck off the register. It's kind of a badge. It says it's a sign of quality. So in my world where I got my training, you kind of have a medical route to mental health to be a psychiatrist. As a medical doctor who specialized in prescribing drugs and diagnosing difficulties. And you have a clinical psychologist. Again, you think about my clinical doctorate is like you go through your kind of rounds and you do all the different parts of mental health and brain functioning, and you come out the other side doing similar work as a psychiatrist, but whereas they do diagnosis and medication, I do formulation and treatment. So I help understand why you've come to this point of struggle, and then where's the route out, not just what will make the symptoms feel better. How do we address the underlying issues?
Well, why psychology?
So that's what I did.
Why psychology, Matt? Why did you want to do this? Was it a long-term ambition?
I think in life you stumble into things. I don't think everything was mapped out. I started my career. I started work, working with. I liked helping people. I was very interested in mental health, but that wasn't where I thought I would go. I started working with young offenders, and I started working with families who in kinship care or special guardianship arrangements. So where kids were not living with their birth parents. They were living with a grandparent, an aunt and uncle for all different range of reasons. And as I did that, I just wanted to learn more. I like learning. I'm an interested person. I'm interested in humans. So I went and did a master's in Edinburgh on child and adolescent psychology. And when I did that, it was run by a team of clinical psychologists. And as I did that training, I was fascinated by the world of the clinical psychology world. And my tutor at the time said, why don't you go down this route? Which I hadn't thought of. I didn't even know it was a title. I didn't know it was a job. And I then had to go back to school, did another master's, worked for several more years, did my doctorate. And then I worked a lot. I still did a lot of, so I did a lot of outdoor work. So I did a lot of outdoor ed work with kids. That's where I started. And then adults. And I did all my research was in that field. So funnily enough, with Ollie, who we're talking about a wild fit this day recently, I still do a lot of work outside with men, like playing around in the mud and getting, trying and pushing ourselves and our physical limits and using our bodies. Brilliant. But now I also adopt that into my clinical work, which is very specialized in burnout and working with the high performers who drive, go all the time and thinking, well, we need to have balance. Otherwise, you just can't have you can't have everything. You can't have your success and your wealth without your health. Health is wealth.
Yeah, so true.
Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. I feel like Ed and I can be quite guilty of generalizing these conversations, and some feedback we received was that we should be more specific, which will allow us to really dig into the detail and perhaps share our own experiences as well. So it sounds like it's quite clear that the struggle of burnout is where you specialize. So Ed, my question is to you, has there ever been a time in your life, right, somebody that's been in the corporate world for tens of years, right, do you feel that you have struggled, maybe not clinically diagnosed, with burnout, and you'd like to discuss that with Matt?
Yeah, I mean, my immediate response is when I had a corporate career, I worked in finance, then oil and gas in London, and worked up in Aberdeen, and worked in Singapore and Malaysia for a while. I'd like to find out from you how you define burnout and recognize burnout. I think the nearest I've come to a mental collapse was about 5 years ago, when I was actually self-employed. And I was running two businesses I'd set up. I was alienated from my children, had moved back home temporarily and to set these businesses up. And it was that that led me to sort of believe I was mentally crashing, just complete overwhelm. And I can talk in more detail about how I dragged myself out of that. I actually moved back down to Oxford, which is when I met Mark walking around a park. And actually the work wasn't the issue. It was the alienation from children and the commuting down to Surrey and, just the overwhelm of it all. And I remember saying to some good friends at the time, I think I'm burning out. And I can go further into this in why I think that. I couldn't sleep. I was waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was very tearful, very short-tempered. And I just knew something was wrong. I was drinking a lot, just out of control, really. So yes, that is probably my example, Mark. What about yourself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing it. And secondly, I think that's understanding the definition, Matt's definition, or what the official definition is of burnout would be extremely helpful. But before I hear that, absolutely, back in 2017, working in the city, very poor, unhealthy habits around drinking and consuming too much food and predominantly sugar as well. Just lacked energy to get up in the morning, was sleeping maybe 4 or 5 hours, broken 4 or 5 hours a night. The anxiety around jumping on the train and going to work, I would snooze the alarm continuously until that very point that you must get up before you were going to get before you're going to be late. I just couldn't, really struggled to function. And I now have an understanding of healthier habits that certainly help. But I'd say fast forward 4 or 5 years, and even being much healthier, I did have one episode where I was on a conference call talking to a couple of clients, and I just completely forgot what I was talking about. And it had never happened to me before. Completely forgot. And then for the next week or so, I felt so foggy, and I was like, oh my gosh, well, I couldn't function. I couldn't exercise. People said that you don't look very well. I looked like I aged 4 or 5 years. I tried to maximize all the healthy habits. I spent a lot of time outside in nature, and it eventually just passed. But I've never experienced anything like it where I just couldn't remember what happened even an hour or so ago, which was scary. And to this day, I wouldn't know what that was. Never went to go and see a doctor about it. But hopefully, just sharing a couple of stories there from us will give Matt an idea of, because we hear it all the time. I literally received a message yesterday from someone I speak to on a regular basis saying, I am exhausted, and I'm relying on alcohol to sleep. I'm then relying on caffeine to stay awake the next day. And then you enter this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So Matt, I suppose the question then is, how do you define burnout?
So, I mean, thank you for both for sharing your experiences. It's an area I've ended up working in from working. So I see lawyers, I see accountants, GPs, investment bankers, hedge fund managers, athletes. And there's similar things come up in the work I see with people, which are very similar to what you're describing. The clinical definition is that it talks about 3 elements of it. So, the overview is that and we can dig into why this is the case in a second, is that it's chronic stress that's unmanaged in the workplace. So it's very clearly defined as separate from the rest of life. It's something to do with work, burnout. It's to do with prolonged chronic stress activation, being in that high stress mode for a very long period of time. And the symptoms, the side effects, the consequences are physical exhaustion and energy depletion. So like just really hard to get up in the morning, feel like you finished a day's work and you're just exhausted from it all. You can't give to the rest of your life. Mental distance from your job, or cynicism or pessimism or negative feelings about it. I'm just not looking forward to going to work. The thing you have passionate about that you just can't find that motivation for. And thirdly, a reduced proficiency or productivity in your job is actually like the work suffering. You're not able to be your best. So those are the kind of 3 factors. And then when I talk to people about what it means, there are kind of a few things that happen really. So there was the physical energy bit I talked about. There's the mood bits that I hear you talking about, Ed, that a lot of people find their emotions are affected. So typically the kind of things I hear and what's born in the literature is that people are more irritable, short-fused, doesn't take much to lose their temper. They have psychological, like cognitive difficulties. So memory, retention, word finding and recall, ability to focus and concentrate gets shortened. And people often find somatic difficulties, body-based difficulties, which are like headaches, migraines, stress, back problems, chronic aches, gastro problems, stomach aches, pains. Because this all stems from what happens when we're in high levels of stress for a very long period of time, because we're not meant to be. And the body and the mind are not separate. They really get impacted by being in that state for a long period of time. So whereas other diagnoses capture what happens when you're in stress for family matters, for other things, burnout really specifically is talking about what happens when the main driver for that is the work, when you're overworked and there's no let up and you don't have the skills, the abilities, the culture in your workplace to find reprieve for that. So the biggest thing I find, maybe the scariest bit of where people come and speak to me, is hopefully lots of people speak to me just to be their best, by the way. Lots of people find me and say, I just want to be the best version I can be before I get to that point. But the worst point is when people start losing hope that things can change and feel better. They feel like they're really stuck. And that's often where the kind of recovery work is, as opposed to the prevention work.
And is there any sort of, I've got lots of questions, Matt, but is there any sort of, the people that don't find you proactively, who come to you in a sort of stress situation where they're looking for help, is there a sort of period of time that this is going on for? Is there an acceleration of symptoms that are they referred from the GP? How are people finding you, and when are they deciding to contact you?
What's great is I get a lot of people reaching out to me while they're finding themselves stressed, or their sleep's affected, or they just find themselves wanting to be better. So I've got the pleasure of kind of psychology sessions 1-to-1 where people have noticed things like in their relationships are suffering, and that's why they're kind of main impact they're seeing, or their moods up and down. But they're still not in full burnout. They're not at that point. Some people find me at that point, and people don't. So in my work, I get people come through organizations quite often, all 1-to-1. They find me directly. And when people find me directly, that's usually because at that point, it's usually because it's like they've hit a wall. Something's really significantly happened. Like they're signed off work because they just can't show up to work, or they've got the big impact of being very, very stressed for a long period of time is your body eventually just gives out. So what happens at that point is people have a mental collapse, like you kind of mentioned before. You just can't function mentally, or their body goes first, and they end up getting signed off because they've had a major issue with their health, a disease, a significant pain, something happens, and they just like their body immobilizes. And so some people get in contact when they're on the road to getting back into work, and their work is helping them find their way back in. Sometimes that's individuals, sometimes that's the organization itself reaches out and said, we need to get this person fit again. And as they start reintroducing back to work, we need a plan how they're going to get there. And when they start taking on shifts again, how we're going to make sure old habits are changed. This doesn't happen again.
Interesting. Can I throw a sort of hypothesis out there, if I may? I mean, I worked in corporate, like a lot of people, I'm sure. Most of our listeners are men aged, 45 to 55, which is kind of what I am. Mark's in his 30s still. But I guess the point I was trying to get to is that the middle, I always sort of assumed that if you've been working for 20, 30 years in a corporate career, or let's say 20 years, and you get to a point, I always imagine that people who've been working for 20 years are able to cope with stress at work. If you take the average lawyer in the city, I don't imagine that suddenly they get to 40, 45, and then suddenly they start burning out, because they've had that level, like an investment banker, they've dealt with that level of pressure for their entire career. So is there something that, are you seeing people who are suddenly getting a promotion, or is it something else in their life? Or are you seeing people who just have never been able to cope with sort of chronic stress, and it's always been their response mechanism from the age of post-university? And have they always been stressed or anxious or not coping with deadlines? And can you reflect on that maybe a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So I think what I see and what you're describing is two different versions of the story, or two different people. So a lot of people, they work out stress. Let's put it in another word, just high pressure environment. So you're in a high demand, high pressure environment for a very, very long period of time. That's manageable because that's where you put your energy. But it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. Something else in life changes, family matter, a bereavement, something extra adds into life. And that's the final thing that breaks the camel's back.
That's important.
So Yeah. So that's one version of the story. Another version of the story is, and I've worked with people who are, we'll think about them as kind of leaders in the field, in different fields. They have worked all their lives in this very, very, high pressure cooker environment, but the body can't sustain that. So there's this idea, was a medical concept called allostatic load, that are being in having high stress, the kind of neurotransmitters, the hormones that go out with that, cortisol, adrenaline, we kind of know what that feels like. You're on go, go, go mode. If you're in drive mode, in threat mode all the time, eventually your body just cannot maintain that. So it's not uncommon, the midlife crisis idea, or the kind of the career break in your sabbatical in your 40s, 50s. You often find people just kind of, the energy just goes. Like, I've been doing this for so long, the body just can't sustain it anymore. And it gives out in some way. Heart failure, heart attacks, a scare in health, those kind of things where you go, whoa, 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 I need to readjust life. I need to readjust my career. What am I doing? And that is also because we think of ourselves as like finely evolved creatures, suit and tie, many millennia mental detours away from our caveman days. But like our anatomy, our neurophysiology, our brain is still that of the same as our human ancestors, same as Homo sapiens have been on this planet for 250,000 years, 300,000 years. We've only been in this kind of work environment where lights are on all day of the week, all times of the day. Your work and your email to access to demand is on all the time. We've only been living that life a very short period of time. So our endocrine system, our stress response system isn't used to being on all the time.
Yeah.
The people who do great are the people who are able to find moments of reprieve, wind down, stress recovery, attention restoration. Those people sustain their careers and perform incredibly throughout their life. But as men, my big thing is, we're not taught the skills of how to downshift through the gears. We're not taught the skills of looking after emotions. We're not taught the skills of how to kind of detach ourselves from our experience without avoiding our emotions and displacing our emotions into addictions or into other things. So I teach, a lot of my work is not just talking, it's teaching people the skills we're just not taught as boys and men.
Yeah.
And maybe even as the clinical work that I work with is I get to do the bit that coaches don't usually do, which is addressing the underlying reasons why we've ended up here and targeting those issues, as opposed to just kind of coaching through the moment. Very privileged position I get. And it's also nice to see people find, that actually with some help and support, life can feel very different and people start reorganizing priorities.
Love that. I think priorities is a key word there. Sometimes we don't proactively list our priorities, and actually we're quite reactive. I know that I certainly was. The whole work thing I think is really interesting, especially what you were saying about high pressured, high demand environments. So I was in recruitment, and I was surrounded by top performers, people billing hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, and they just seem to be able to cope with the pressure and the stress a lot better than I could. And this whole idea of having the tools, right? You can't attend what you don't see, and that I just at the time could not understand why the companies would and because of the nature of those environments, it's very much profit driven, right? It's all about performance, it's all about finance, it's all about goals, it's all about growth, it's etc. etc. And the top 10%, well, they were all great. They were all doing their company trips, etc., high performance dinners. But the rest of us were in a really bad way. And then some of us were young fathers as well, which then added to this approach that you're talking about, that didn't again have the tools of how to release emotions at the weekend. Initially, I would do that through playing sport and playing rugby. You get injured, suddenly you don't do that. Suddenly you don't have that sense of release. Suddenly, you're avoiding emotions even more and drowning in alcohol. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I would love to. I really like this whole notion of prevention, and why is it that I believe we might have spoken about this, Matt. That it's the I can't remember whose quote it is, but it's the go down, go upstream and find out why people are falling in, as opposed to pulling them out at the bottom, right? That to me is vital, because that is the same with disease. It's this compound effect. You're talking about the body not being able to cope with everything that I don't believe it's this one thing happens, this trigger, and then suddenly you're stressed, and it's a compound effect of everything that you're having to put up with, and then the body just goes, no, thank you. No, thank you. I've had enough. So I love the work that you're doing. I'd love to hear about what leaders in the workplace are doing to prevent perhaps the situation that I thought that I was in, being one of the okay performers, one of those people that is trying their best but doesn't have the tools. What are companies doing? Ed, I'm curious. Did you ever experience a similar thing where you felt that leaders in the workplace could do more around that and reducing stress? It felt like more often than not, because of the pressure and on performance.
No, I think corporate wellness probably only came into the marketplace, and I'm very London-centric, probably 7 to 10 years ago. I think it was pretty much ignored before then. It might be a one-to-one appraisal once a year, and your boss would take you out for lunch. I mean, I'm going to be a bit controversial, a bit contrarian here. I mean, from my perspective, like a lot of people, university, then into some kind of career, into profession, sitting on the 523 into London Bridge, absolutely hated it, hated my commuting, hated the life that I got myself into, stuck, mortgage, married, kids. And I will throw myself out there and say, I think there's a vast majority of men and women doing things they don't really resonate with, not particularly fulfilled, not enjoying, stuck, unable to break out of a career that they've put a lot of time and investment in. And it's a very noble thing to be working in something you're not really, really enjoying for the sake of a family or kids. And we should congratulate men and women for doing that. And not giving up on that, because they're supporting and providing. But it comes as no surprise to me that eventually you get sick from it. And I don't believe you can carry on doing something that it doesn't fulfill some kind of emotional need or purpose. And if you're just going to work to bring home a salary check and provide for a family, noble as that is, I think it'll make you ill at some point. And you either soothe it by self-sabotaging. We know lots of men who are drinking themselves. I spent 10 years, soothing myself with alcohol on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just to get through. And then it's Monday again, and you just keep repeating, and you keep repeating, and then it's a holiday, and you keep repeating. And I don't know, I'm going on a bit here, Matt, but I think is that how you feel? Is that what you're seeing? And obviously not everybody's like this, but is that a trend you're seeing in the UK? Or are you going to alienate a load of your clients by saying by saying yes?
Again, and I think it's all individual based, exactly why you end up where you are. But there is this thing about people who are highly passionate and driven by what they do, who fall out of love with it. So there's definitely that. And then there's people who don't like what they do, who don't have meaning and purpose in their work. And if we I pick those words carefully, because meaning and purpose are two core human needs, especially men. I think they're really important to have. Like, I do something that has a meaning and purpose. Now, that meaning and purpose can be, I'm a provider for my family. I don't care what I do. Like, the most important bit is I'm with my family and I give them great life, and that's what I want from life.
Yeah.
Other people will say my meaning and purpose is to help others. Other people will say my meaning and purpose is to innovate and create, and that will be different for everyone. But if there's no sense of meaning and purpose, I don't like the job. What I do doesn't feel fulfilling for the outcome of it. well, then what do you do if you don't experience any mastery or any joy? That's a dangerous thing, because where then do you fulfill, just from a body-based thing, where do you fulfill the positive emotions and the neurotransmitters of positive emotion? Well, where are you going to get those from? You're going to get those from short-term hits: sugar, caffeine, drugs, alcohol, gambling, things that do the same things to our brain that give us good rewards, that aren't deep driven, also kind of fundamental needs. So yeah, I think a lot of people face a very hard life where they're not supported as kids to find those meaning and purpose. They're not in the right, let's just think about it from a cultural point of view, being a little bit political. Maybe they're not in the right, society isn't set up in such a way that's fair and equal. So they don't have those opportunities to even consider, what is it that I want to do that feels meaningful for me? But without that, Viktor Frankl, read any of his books, they're wonderful.
And social meaning.
Yeah, I'll tell you time and time again, meaning and purpose is incredibly important.
Also, it's a great answer, Matt. Thank you. And I think if you add the complexities around, I was looking on my LinkedIn today, and a lot of people I used to work with, and of course I was just sort of smiling to myself that they're all sort of senior vice president and director and very corporate type guys. And again, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but it's all the guys in finance and in law in the suits, looking mysterious on the LinkedIn profiles, and you just wonder. And I just reflect and thought, I was a good job title and had a nice tie on and stuff. And I do really think, that pressure of external validation, the title, the package, you're around peers, very competitive, and I imagine that if you're not conscious of what's fueling that validation, and if it is those extrinsic, and Mark and I talk a lot about extrinsic validation versus self-worth and your own knowing who you are and believing in yourself, and from more sort of moral, ethical, positive type things, as opposed to the fact that you have a nice set of gates and a nice Range Rover and a good title. And I know that sounds a bit sort of glib, but I was stuck in, talk about personal sort of situations, I was very much stuck in that Surrey commuter belt, aspirational, it's generally, the unhappiness I was feeling about my career and the lack of meaning and genuine interest in it was sort of soothed by the fact that everything was going around okay on the face of it, the job title, the increasing sort of prestige around that. And do you connect with that a lot? Is it back to sort of, when you're talking to your clients, are they sort of saying to you, I'm doing all this, on the face of it I look really successful, I've got a great house, a great job, and great kids and a wife maybe, but I just feel like, who am I, what am I doing, what am I getting out of this? And is it that kind of questioning, or am I just generalizing too much here? I know it's very specific, but we're trying ultimately to find patterns that we can offer some advice to people who may be suffering in this kind of lifestyle. And I know it's wrong to generalize, but I'm going to throw that at you if it helps.
Yeah. So I think it's really insightful, and obviously born from your experience and those that you help, that external validation is never, it's a dangerous course to go down versus internal validation. So lots of people I work with, love their cars, but they love them and they know why. There's a great story behind that, and that means a lot to them. There are people who just want to buy the latest car and have to keep up with the Jones. That's very dangerous. That you used the word about validation, and so a lot of the work I do ends up working with the skills of the now, and then very practically habits, all those things you're going to do. But then with my work and my skill set, we end up going off into the past. And then I'm kind of trained in some specialized techniques like EMDR, which helps heal the burdens from the past and take away the emotional impact they have on the present. So I often talk about it takes away the invisible strings of our past that still control us 20, 30 years later. And so when you talk about invalidation, inadequacy, worthlessness, and where you get your sense of validation, the work I do with people often is to then go back and think, well, where's that coming from? Because those that are aware, So the number one thing, if we're talking about generalizations, the number one key skill or thing to avoid burnout, and I would say to avoid mental health difficulty, is self-awareness. It's not very sexy. It's not the ice baths. It's not the cold showers.
I absolutely love it.
But it's self-awareness. Because self-awareness, if you know where things come from, more than that, if you then understand where they come from, and then in the moment, you know what's happening, and you are able to, like you said before, Mark, you're able to pause enough between stimulus and response, between something's happening out there, someone said something to me, I've just received that email, I'm about to go into this work meeting, and I can feel what's about to happen inside me. Before the words come out your mouth, before you press the send button, before you do the action, if you're aware enough to go, that thing's happening, right? That not good enough feelings come up again, and I'm trying to then bulldoze my way through this. Or they've just struck a chord in me, sounded just like Dad. I'm going to try and make them feel this small. In the moment, I need to pause before I do something. Or yeah, I need a cigarette, or I need to do something else to make myself feel okay before I reach for it. That self-awareness is the thing I spend a lot of time with men learning and teaching. So if you're a man who finds that actually you act and later think about it, you do things and regret, you find yourself unable to manage the ups and downs of life, it's just life happens to you and you're not in control. The work it starts with is actually building knowledge about our emotions, our internal states, what happens in your brain, and then catching yourself and really building that knowledge about yourself. And we either build the skills to manage that, or even next level, we go to the past and we clear out things that no longer serve you, so they don't have a hold of you in the present.
So what I'm hearing there is, if the burnout can often be a reflection, yes, it can be chronic stress at work, but it's something else it's suppression of other feelings that maybe is the thing that tips the iceberg, if you like, because it's not just the workload and the pressure, it's the combination of factors that are is that right? Is it usually something else?
Well, yes. So I mean, so we talk about, so the definition talks about it's work and the chronic workplace stress, but you're a human. So there's a reason high achievers are find themselves in really high pressure situations, striving to be the best in the world and find the best things. There's a reason we're all there. The best athletes in the world have tricky things happen to them. The most incredible human beings on this planet have had tricky life experiences, and they're part of our story. Now, you can harness that, so you can control that, or it can control you. And in terms of your emotions, one thing I often say to people is, what you deny will amplify. What you deny will amplify. Yeah. So if you really avoid your emotions,
great.
They can't help but grow inside and come out and get bigger. So even if you're listening to the podcast, you're seeing us, right? So seeing us on this podcast, right? I'll do an exercise with you guys bear with me for 10-second exercise. Okay, so Ed, Mark, for the next 10 seconds, and if you're watching, next 10 seconds, before we start, I want you to imagine like a tiny pink elephant. He's this big, and he's got a little sombrero on, and he's on my shoulder, and he's dancing. Okay, so there's a pink elephant on my shoulder dancing. Can you imagine that? Yes. Yeah. Okay, right. When I say go, for the next 10 seconds, you're not allowed to think about the pink elephant dancing on my shoulder. Steady and go. Ten. Okay. Right. What happened?
I thought about it the whole time. The brain doesn't understand, don't. Right? Yes. It's brilliant, very, very playful. It's this. I'm going to let you finish first, because I could absolutely blurt out some mental chatter here in terms of why I'm here and loving about this conversation.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
It's this idea of self-awareness, right? I believe that most people are talking about these generic conversations around, oh, you could, if you feel burnout, you feel stressed, you feel depressed, you're going through divorce, you can do these things, these really healthy things. But not many people are talking about raising your self-awareness or your consciousness, and understanding that and this is very much a tool, one of the major tools that we haven't been taught, that you have a choice before you respond. Exactly like you talked about, Matt, that there is a moment in time where something will happen, or your thought will come up, and before you'll feel a feeling, but before the behavior or action, there is an element of self-awareness, consciousness, that you can stop anything. I'll give you an example. So I still hold limiting beliefs, right, in terms of not feeling enough, or this little boy. And on Saturday, I went to visit a CrossFit event, coincidentally held on a farm, where three teams had been entered from our local CrossFit gym, and I felt like the right thing to do. I'm learning videography. I was curious to see how they structured a CrossFit event on a farm, and I thought, I'm going to go down and support them. It's 15, 20 minutes from my house. And when I got there, I'm on my own. When I got there and I saw them all, the fear that I had going up to speak to them in this environment, this unknown environment, was so real. All I could hear and feel was, don't go say hello. They're going to think you're weird for turning up on your own. You're not competing in the event. Why would you turn up, etc., etc.? You're stupid. Like all these things. And it's just about recognizing this self-awareness, this consciousness, this moment in time that you have where you go, do you know what? I feel and I hear things. It's simply not true. Mm-hmm. Simply not true. I reconnected with my breath. I became present, and I walked towards them and I said, hello. And everything just went away. And they would be absolutely none the wiser. And I love the idea of, we are not the thoughts, we are not the feelings. Neil, oh my gosh, what is his name? Talks about the three principles: thought, consciousness, mind. And it's this whole idea that first comes the thought. You have no idea. The bad news is you have no control over that. So you can hear negativity, because thoughts are memories. If you listen to neuroscientists, someone like Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks about how thoughts are memories, and it's literally, you mentioned it about is it a parent? Is it a friend at school? Is it a teacher? That thought is merely a memory, something that happened previously. And that's what I'm experiencing in that moment. What I was hearing and seeing in my mind was not happening in the present. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone here, and it makes sense.
No, it's neuroscience, right? Your brain, you're protecting yourself with an emotion of cortisol. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, by pulling on a past memory, which is triggered by that cortisol or that emotional reaction. So your anxiety around meeting new people, and that you're defining yourself as an introvert, and your body's then responding with more cortisol. And as you said, I've probably got that completely wrong. Then you're breathing yourself back to your nervous system to calm down the brain and the thought process, to stop pulling on that negative memory that you've got, presumably of past experiences. And that's that sounds like, is that correct, Matt? Or are you going to tell me that's utter nonsense before I carry on?
Yeah, well, but
roughly, just say approximately, Ed, just humanly for a second.
External validation.
Almost 100%.
Yeah,
I can say almost 100%.
Well, I'm a straight C grade student,
which I think is about as good as anyone ever gets.
Well, it sounded half plausible to a retard.
No, it is. No, it is, because so thoughts we have something like 10,000 thoughts a day. They just happen. You don't have control over the amount of mental chatter goes on. You're right. There's a skill in being able to observe your thoughts. Oh, that's interesting. And then so why it's not very sexy, but I talked about the importance of it, as you're talking about, Mark and Ed, like that. Actually, what you're saying is, if you can catch your train of thought, you have the opportunity to respond in a way that you might choose. And so self-awareness, so one quote by a very famous psychologist in this area of stress and trauma, he says, physical self-awareness releases the tyranny of the past. So what he's saying in that is being aware of our thoughts, yes, but physical self-awareness, also that feeling, oh, I'm feeling that butterflies in my stomach. I'm feeling a bit shaky. I'm feeling my breath shorten. Yep. I'm feeling those familiar sensations. If I become aware of that, it releases the tyranny of the past. You're not going to be controlled by them. You need the strategies, just as you said, Ed, at that point you said about the breath work you noticed Mark was doing, because actually what happens is you need to notice, I went to, we all have this. I have my days all the time. I feel anxious all the time. Many times I feel anxious in different experiences. And I have to catch myself and go, oh, okay, that thing's coming up. I feel it. Okay, what's that about? Some mental talk, as well as putting in my strategies to then downshift, downregulate, find that calm, alert state again. I've gone too high, gone too activated. The other thing that can happen is you go too low and you go too downregulated, to dissociated, into flop response, hard to get up and go. And you need to catch yourself and go, come on, this isn't just I'm tired. This is I'm trying to mentally distance from this thing I'm trying to do. I was going to go out with friends and you go, oh, I'm so tired, I can't be bothered. Well, actually, I'm nervous about that. Well, actually, it's really difficult to see Ed after he said that terrible thing to me last week, whatever happened. And you go, okay, that's not about that. That's about something bigger. I've got the choice here. If it's important enough to me, I need to catch myself, respond, and get up and go. And I say all this like in a very kind of way. Of course, you should do all these things. This is the hard work, is to actually to learn to do this work, because it requires not, one thing it requires is a very self-reflective person who's willing to face the darkness, or another person to help you see it, see the things about yourself, because we have blind spots. There's things about, like in a car, you have a blind spot, you can't see what's right next to you, not far away, but right next to you, almost in front of your face. Same thing for us as humans. You could either look very hard in a mirror, but you might miss a few things. You can't see your back. You can't see some bits about you. Or you need someone else, like a psychologist, like a good person, like you guys that work with people, to notice and to be curious with someone to help them do this.
Yeah.
So you can't do it alone. If you do it alone, you've got to be really open. It's a rare person to be able to do that. You can. Much easier than someone else.
That self-awareness theme, how do people know if they're self-aware, Matt? Dr. Matt?
Oh, gosh, Ed, that's a good question, isn't it?
How do people know if they're self-aware?
That one up for about 40 minutes. Also, I wanted to say, secrets make you sick. I love what you said about what you deny, you amplify. And it's similar to secrets make you sick, which I absolutely believe.
That should be the title of this conversation.
Yes,
I love that.
How do you know if you're a middle-aged or guy watching this? How do you know if you're self-aware? And if self-awareness is a massive benefit to recognizing destructive behaviors and possible route to burnout, what can you do to check yourself?
Right. So, really good question. You're going to give me 10 seconds to think it through, and then I'm going to respond to my best version.
Okay. Whilst you're doing that, I'm going to pad 10 seconds with. We had a guy called Andy McMenemy on this thing a few weeks ago, who actually, after years of being a high-performing salesman, I don't know if you know him, in a car company, literally just collapsed in the shower. Ended up on the floor of the shower. No stroke, no heart attack, nothing wrong with him. And he talked about this very eloquently. His body just shut down. Yeah. And that was his example of burnout. Do you remember that, Mark?
I do, yes, yeah.
Very, very powerful. Anyway, that was more than 10 seconds. So
yeah, great. And I've had similar things where people have called 999, believing they're having a panic attack, believing they're having a heart attack, genuinely believe they're about to die. And it's the stress response. Okay, so my best quick answer to this. I don't like quick answers, but let's do a quick answer. So how do you know if you're self-aware? This is a skill that you cultivate. So I guess a good sign of self-awareness is, are you somebody who notices how you speak to yourself. That'd be a good starting point. So do you notice not only the words that you say to yourself, but can you also notice, and are you aware of the tone of voice that you speak to yourself with? Those things together would be a pretty good self-awareness indicator that you catch yourself going, oh, you fucking idiot. Sorry, if we can swear, we swear. So,
you swear.
yeah. And you notice, you say, come on, and you say it. And you've noticed, right, the words that came out when you go, whoa, 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 whoa. If you catch yourself and say, what is going on there? Because you're noticing not only the tone, but also the quality of the words that came out. I think if somebody does that, you'd pretty much know you're pretty good on the track of self-aware. If you know why you acted the way you acted, then you're pretty good too. That usually happens for most people after the event. So if at the end of the event and you go, oh God, I shouldn't have done that. If you can go, the languages, if you can use I language rather than you or them language, that's a good indicator of self-awareness as well. So instead of they were rude, they were intolerant, they made me angry. If instead you're using language like, I was angry in the way they spoke to me, or I felt deeply upset by deeply upset that I never got the call from that person. I took offense at what you did, as opposed to I was offended.
Yeah.
If you're using that language, again, I'd say that's a better indicator of self-awareness. So quickly, what have I said? I language. I've said noticing the thought content and the quality of your internal voice. And I'd also say, are you somebody who manages their temper and manages their mood without suppressing anger and never actually feeling anger? That's a good indicator. The opposite is, are you somebody who always loses their temper or can't control the words that comes out of your mouth? You're not, then again, we're falling into the opposite signs of the camp. So yeah, there's my top 3 ideas so
Brilliant.
far.
That was brilliant. That was brilliant, and I think that's a really good way to finish the conversation. Matt, Ed, I'm sure you'll agree with this. Would absolutely love to get you back on. Where can people hear more about the good work that you're doing, or if they wanted to reach out to you to speak to you directly? What are your social media handles?
So I'm known as the burnout psychologist. So the.burnout.psychologist, LinkedIn, Instagram is where I'm mostly. If you want to go find me online, you type that into Google or theburnouttpsych.com. You'll find me. Reach out. I'm always happy to have a free discovery call with someone just to talk through what's going on, and we'll see if we're a good fit for individuals, or I do work with teams as well.
Amazing. And for people that listen regularly, and also the people that follow us, you'll know that we've got the Ibiza event coming up in September. I'm trying to convince Matt to come and spend some time out there as well. Whether it's this one or another one, I think brilliant conversation. You come across extremely professional. The insight is amazing. I'll certainly be staying in contact, and I definitely want to get that coffee in soon. Ed, was there anything that you wanted to say?
No, really. Thank you very much, Matt. I really enjoyed the conversation. I could carry on for hours. I don't feel like we even touched the surface of it. And I think if people are watching this and they sense something is off, if they recognize some behavioral patterns that have changed, please reach out to Matt or a healthcare professional. Go to the GP, get some therapy, talk to your partner, talk to people that you trust, because often we go through life burying things when we know their behaviors are not quite what they were previously. So yeah, I hope this is inspiring to a few people to reach out to someone like Matt and to get some advice. There's absolutely no shame in it, no harm in it, and that actually can waken up a lot of self-awareness and a lot of positive growth. And again, you might be a very high-performing individual in many metrics and maybe struggling in many others. So everyone has an individual journey and struggles, and I think we all know that by now. So thank you, Matt, and hope to see you again. Thank you.
The major question I'm going to leave you with Matt is because this Ed touched it there about supporting partners. I would, and I might be generalizing or might have a bias based on my experience, right? But I would guess that the majority of people that experience burnout, it's because I've heard this from tens of people over the years, right? That if they were to be diagnosed with burnout and they were to go home and say, hey, I'm burnt out, or I'm stressed, or I'm depressed, etc., how supportive is the other part of the relationship, right? In terms of, I know that when I would vulnerably open up that I'm struggling or I felt burnt out, it would just be met with, well, I do all these things and I cope absolutely fine. So why should you be any different? And that is a common thing that I hear from men. So I'll leave you with that. I would absolutely love to hear about, one, is your experience similar or is it mixed? And in terms of what advice could we give, male or female partner, to be supportive to anyone that is experiencing a very difficult time in their life in terms of this topic.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna say two things then. First thing is that I'll give some brief advice and then I'll give a recommendation. It's like a doctor does. So I'll say firstly, do speak out to partners, speak out to people that you feel will hear you and that you will be heard by. And try your best to express yourself. You can control that. You cannot control how people will respond to you. That second part of how you communicate effectively in relationships, there's a part 2 discussion. So I'm going to stop there because that's a huge topic.
Awesome. Matt, great to see you. Thanks again. If you like the conversation, please do feel free to follow Matt, drop him a message, and subscribe to the channel. We're going to get Matt back on, and like I said, hopefully get him to a Blue Mind event very soon. Thanks a lot, Matt. Great to see you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this Blue Mind conversation. We hope you've enjoyed the content and ask a small favour that you like and share the page. The bigger the page, the more interesting the guest should be, and the more content we can put out. If you are interested in talking to Mark and myself about any of the topics covered, coaching, speaking, or any other collaboration, please drop Mark or I an email at ed@Blue Mind Approach or mark@Blue Mind Approach, or contact us on our social media channels. Thank you for listening. Take care.